Welcome back to Outdoor Adventures Podcast 101. So today it's Clamming 101, and we've got Chris Hayden, our clamming expert, in the house, and Dylan and myself. I grew up razor clamming a little bit with my dad, and we just had clam shovels, and my mom and dad both actually clammed before they had kids. They were kind of into doing it. It's a cheap activity. We were always in blue jeans rolled up, and we'd wait for that minus tide, and we'd get out there with our shovels. And I haven't probably done it in 30 years, but our family was big with the milk carton thing. So we would have a milk jug on your belt loop through the handle of the milk jug with a slot in it. So every clam you would get, you would just throw in the slot until you got, and I think at that time the limit was 12 clams. And I've done a little bit of raking for cockles and butter clams too, and I've done that as an adult. But compared to a razor clam, when you get those things, they're just not the same. They don't measure up.
No, and they're, I would say there's three kinds of clamming here. We have razor clams, which is a beach activity. Then we have the raking for bay clams. And then also a bay clam thing is digging for gooey ducks, which is, I've done one. And it's too much work because you can spend a couple hours sometimes trying to dig one out because they're such a big mollusk, I guess they would be, and they can dig down so deep.
They're really good eating, though, aren't they?
They are good eating. I mean, yeah, I think all clams are good eating if you prepare them correctly. I like razors. That's what we kind of focus on. So that's probably what we'll talk about. I'll talk about rules. And now these rules aren't really legal rules, the first two, but they're rules to get you associated with like the two most important things to look for when you're razor clamming. And the first one is minus tide. Now you can go online, or if you go into any sporting goods store, they usually have a tide book. They're a couple bucks, and that's what I just buy one at the beginning of the year. And so you want to look for minus tides just so, it's just an indication on how far out the tide will be so you can get out further into the clam beds. And then the other rule which is, I argue, is the most important one is the biotoxin or the red tide rule. And if you go on ODFW or you sign up for the email, they will send you one out when it's closed due to biotoxin. Or there's a hotline, and I have the number. It's 800-448-2474. And always call this before you go. I have never known anyone to get sick, but if you do get sick, it's fatal in a lot of cases, and there is nothing you can take for it. It's not like getting bit by a snake. You basically are hooked up to a respirator and breathing equipment until it passes through your body. And I think that is scary.
Yeah, and that's any shellfish.
Any shellfish gets it, and there's some, I've heard some talk on that's why in the Jewish religion, it's an ancient religion, really. It goes back thousands of years. That's why they were told not to eat shellfish. I've heard that. And who knows if that's true or not, but that would make sense if you're thinking logically. Any shellfish, any filter feeder can get it. Back then it was 12. It's 15 now. And you'll dig them using either a shovel or a clam gun. And I brought some, so we'll take some pictures and put it up on the Instagram so people can get an idea. And you can do them, I'm not sure about California, but there's got to be places in California to do it, but up and down the whole of the Oregon coast, up into Washington. And you want to look for really sandy, not like the rocky, some southern Oregon beaches get kind of rocky. The most popular place is by Fort Stevens. That's where I took my wife the first time. And after a half hour, she was hooked into digging razor clams because it is a lot of fun. There's tons of people out there. It's generally when there's a lot of people, it's a nice day. But you can just park and walk right out onto the beach. And you're going to get right down near the surf. And you're going to look for what's called a show hole. And it's like about the size of it's a divot like the size of a dime. And that's where you want to focus. And you can just quit. Once you learn what to look for, you can find them. Just one after the other. And then when you're using a clam gun, after you find the hole, I put it directly in the middle of the clam gun. It's about a 4-inch piece of PVC or metal now that they're kind of nice. The one that I brought today is kind of a higher end one, which is what you want to spend the money on. and put it directly over it, and then tilt back a few degrees towards the top end where your handles are and face the bottom towards the surf, because that's actually how they're digged down. And just work that thing down as deep as you can. Plug the hole. There's always a hole at the top. And I mean, it takes a lot to get that much sand out of the ground, and pull that thing up, dump it down on, let the hole go. It'll slide out, and dig down looking for a razor clam. So that's one way. The other way is to use a shovel. Same theory on how you dig, but you need to be fast. And usually when you see like the old timer guy, guys my dad age, 60s, they're using shovels because they believe that's the best way to dig. I'm not that good at it with the shovel. I'm more of a clam gun guy. But you need to be careful reaching into the hole. There's a reason why they're called razor clams. They will cut you up. They are so sharp, it's amazing. So if you do dig, wear a glove. Leather is going to get soaked, but they make those Atlas dipped gloves. That's what I would wear, to be honest.
So you're a first-time clammer. When I clammed, we had the shovels. My dad would have the shovel upside down, and he'd be hitting all those holes with the wood. And then when he'd see an active hole, I guess, if you will, he would start to dig. And, maybe 3 shovels in, and then about the 4th one, he'd caught up to the clam, and he'd go kind of straight down, then angle the shovel to stop the clam. And he was really good at it. He never broke a clam. Every time I tried to do it, I was breaking those clams.
Yes.
Yeah.
The tap is, you'll see guys doing the tap, and the tap is to get the clam. It's a reflex, right? Because they're a filter feeder, so they have this little like tongue almost that comes up, and that's what they're feeding with, and that will get it to move in back towards the shell, and that's what creates that divot. And so you'll know one's there. Some people say you can tell the size of the clam by how big the divot is. I don't think that's true. I mean, I haven't seen that to be true.
And there's no size restriction. It's just the first 15 you get, or
first 15 you get, but there is something having to do with size. It's called upsizing. Whatever you dig, you have to take, and that is mostly because people don't know how to put them back in the hole correctly. Because if you put them in upside down, they'll die. They need to be put in exactly how they're taken out, and that's why you can't do that, because of the way that they dig down and the feeder comes out. But they can vary in size. Lately, the last couple of years, they've been really big. I mean, as long as my hand. I have a pretty big hand. I mean, I've seen them 5-6 inches long. I mean, 3 inches. They're wide. After you get your limit, you're going to want to just get a bag of ice and set them in the ice. Don't put them in water, because they will drown, and then they'll go bad. And when you prepare them, the way I like to do it is to use an electric tea kettle and heat the water up and dump it over there, and then over the clams, and the clam will just split open real fast. And that and a pair of scissors. And you can go online. I mean, YouTube, there's plenty of videos. If I don't go for a couple of years, I kind of forget on how to actually clean them, what part, you can tell which parts to eat, but the most efficient way to clean them. So I just went back on YouTube. Okay, this is how you do it. And you can even keep the necks for bait if you jetty fish. I like to do that.
So if you're brand new to clamming, let's talk about gear. How do you get started? What do you buy to get going? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I would buy a gun. If it was me, you can buy them at Fisherman's. They're not more than $100, or you can do the shovel. The clam gun's going to be the easiest for the beginner to do. They do range from $70 to about $300 for the most high efficient one, called the Claminator. They sell them in some of the more local sporting goods stores up on the coast, but don't waste your money on that. You don't need to.
The name is probably worth
it. It is. I don't know what the one I brought today has a name. Well, when we take the picture, we'll get it, because they're always like, it's like a marketing thing. But I mean, who are you going after? The hardcore clam guy. Oh, it's a funny thing.
I need the Claminator.
Yeah, I gotta have the clam. Oh, you got a Claminator? That's what it is. Yeah, so get a clam gun, and then you can go the milk jug route, or they sell a net now that has the belt loop. I bought those. I don't know what they cost, but they're a couple bucks, and they're good for a while. If you, I always leave mine out on the fence, So I only get like 2 years out of them because they deteriorate kind of fast. But that's the way you go. And if you're in Oregon and you're going for the first time, go to Fort Stevens. You can find it online. It's in the next town, I guess, west of Astoria called Warrington. And it's they have a parking lot right up by the beach, and you can just walk right out by where the Iredale, which is the ship that ran aground, I don't know how many decades ago. And you can go out there, and you'll see other people doing it. If you don't want to be around the crowds, I would go more towards the fall or winter. There's a lot, the diehard guys are out then. You need to dress appropriately. The summer, I'm just wearing, like water socks, like what, you had as a kid, or barefoot. It's nice out. In the winter, sometimes I wear, muck boots, or I have some like individual hip waders. I wear those. It's Oregon. It gets cold.
Are you ever out in the surf?
Yeah, so you're not really out in the surf. Sometimes when you get a real extreme negative tide, you'll have to cross a small little bit of standing water to get out to another bar, a sandbar. Those are usually, in my experience, that's the best, getting out there, because they're not as frequented as often by just the everyday guy going out.
So I got a question about the red tide, or
Yeah.
you mentioned that a little bit. So what is that specifically? You
Yeah,
said
so it's
something about
a
the clam itself.
Yeah, so it's a biotoxin, and red tide. If the water's red, doesn't necessarily mean it is a biotoxin. There's just natural algae. I thought that was interesting, because you always just associate the two together. It's a biotoxin that is picked up and stored in filter feeders, and that's why you really want to. I didn't think it was as bad when I was, you get sick. That's all you're told, as a kid. But then when I was looking it up, I was like, oh my goodness, I do not want to get that. But it's all filter feeder, so you will get it with oysters. In Oregon, we don't have a oyster season. You cannot pick up a native, but in Washington, you can. You just have to leave the shell.
Crabs can get it too, can't
Yeah, I would think so, right?
they? I think they shut down crabbing during red tide.
It's a filtering animal, and I would also we do have from what I've talked to guys who dive up here. We do have scallops here. It's just not common for guys to dive, but they would get it also because their shell doesn't shut all the way. That's the thing; it's always open to some degree. And oysters can shut pretty tight. It's just that they're stuck in the water; they have nowhere to go. They just live on the rock that they're on. So I don't know if when the red tide comes. In Oregon we have oyster farms. There's on the Yaquina Bay estuary. There's our longest standing one from what I know, and that's where I buy oysters. I've always bought oysters there, so it's never shut down. So I just don't think it makes it up into the river system. It's just along the coast in the bays where you can get it.
So is this a specific time of year you're going to see that?
It's spring, summer. It's usually when it's warmer, but I always just check before I go.
Right.
It's just something I do. It's an easy search. It takes 2 minutes to find.
Yeah.
It's not worth the hassle, but my family does it. My dad's been doing it for a lot of years, so he's one of those guys who's always doing something on the weekend. And you going clamming? No, red tide. So I just got the guy to ask.
How often are you guys clamming throughout the year?
Half a dozen to a dozen times a year. It's a time. We work in ag, so Saturdays are pretty filled up when it's nice out this time of year. But yeah, half a dozen times. I like to start. I usually don't start going until August. We make it up to Astoria for the Scandinavian Festival, and so that's when my wife and I can go because we're already up there. And then up into the winter, we try to go.
So is there a specific season for these?
No, it's off and on year round.
Okay.
Yes.
So you can just January 1 to December 31st.
Because it's just a generic shellfish license that you get. I don't know what the cost is, but they're not that much, $12, $14. Yeah. And so they don't have a season like what we do with deer or something like that. They will close it. They do periodically say it's closed from now to now.
Okay.
And then It will open up. So it just reopened in Washington this week, I think, or last week.
Yeah, it was the 23rd of March.
23rd
I
of
posted
March
it on
it
the
opened.
Facebook site because I've, that clamming in Long Beach, Washington, where you can drive out on the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've never done it, I don't know what the non-resident tag is or license is, but a resident shellfish in Oregon is $10.
Cheap.
And then non-resident is $28. So I when I did the Long Beach, Washington, I want to say it was relatively inexpensive.
Yeah.
And they have a huge resource there. And you drive right out to the clams, and people make a whole day out of it.
Yeah, it's and that's a cool town right over the bridge, right? A little bit from Astoria, so it's not far for us to get to. Their oyster season there's it's kind of a cool thing to get out and grab one in the wild because we haven't, my whole life you haven't been able to do that here. I hear talks that the next 10 or 15 years it's going to happen. I just don't see that happening here because they were hammered hard back in the day by us mostly. So those ones, the oysters up there, you have to pick them in the bed and then you got to leave the shell. So that prevents commercial or, guys selling them and stuff like that on the side.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan, you ready to go clamming?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I think you should
ready to do
go.
it.
They're one of the best tasting. I air fry them, which is the way a little bit healthier.
Yeah,
I like that.
that sounds awesome.
A
Yeah.
little bit healthier instead of deep frying. That's how I always did it, but I'm getting to the age where I can't be just deep frying everything.
Have you heard? I'm sure you guys have seen that Grant's Getaways guy. He had a show, a local show here about outdoor type stuff, and I always remember his clamming episode because he went back and made these clam sandwiches, fried them up. They looked amazing.
Yeah, you can make sandwiches with them, but we just we just air fry them and make fries, something like that. Or my mom, she makes clam chowder using razors, and I think that's the best homemade clam chowder. This time of year it's cold, definitely the best eating food.
How do you preserve them? So if you get a bunch of them, do you try to freeze them? Or
Yeah, so they're good for about 30 days in the freezer, and they say about 3-4 days in the fridge. Generally speaking, I'm one of those guys that likes to just, when I get home, I just take care of them. It's my wife and I, so it's 30 clams. That's not that hard to deal with. They're not like big or anything. You just really just got to, I like the day before I get the stuff out, get prepared, because, usually you're up early. The cool thing about it, though, is later in the year, you get negative tides later in the day. So you can go out at like 5:30 p.m. with a lantern and dig clams, which is kind of cool because you can leave work a little bit early. It's not that far. I don't know how far it is for us, hour and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not that bad. But there's other beaches you can do it at. I have not done it at many other beaches in Oregon just because that's where we've always gone.
And isn't the main thing, what I remember from a kid, the most important thing is getting all the sand out of the clam when you're cleaning them. Because if we've all bitten into that clam that's got a hunk of sand in it, and that's never a good.
Yeah, I just rinse them, cold water rinse, and then I will, I have a double sink. That's the best thing to use if you're cleaning clams. And I'll put the ice and put a little bit of water in them and just leave them there for a few minutes, and they'll spit, like oysters spit sand sometimes, clams will too. And then really, when you're doing them individually with the kettle, because the moment you hit them with that hot water, they split like wide open, like they're like dead, and really wash them good. Every now and then you're still going to get sand. It's whatever, but I just try to wash them as best as possible because it makes a cleaner eaten clam. Hot water, and then it's cold water. And then I try to eat them in, that day or the next day. I don't freeze them. I just don't think when you freeze something like that, it tastes as good. My dad does. I don't know if he even, he's been doing it for so long, they all just taste the same. But I'm that day or the next day eating them.
Yeah, I've froze crawfish and
Never freeze
crabs.
Never freeze crawfish.
It's never the same.
If you freeze crawfish, we have these old, like they're square Tupperware, like from the 80s. Really cold distilled water. That's where I froze them. They kind of turn out. That's another one we can do for a 101 is crawfish because I do a lot of that.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
I've never done that. So
better than actual lobster, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Chris.
Yep, thank you.
Appreciate it.